Okay, this is ThinkTech Hawaii. I'm Jay Fidell. It's Energy 808, the cutting edge. My co-host is Marco Mangelsdorf, and we have two fabulous guests. We have Jay Griffin. He's the chair of the PUC, and at the same time, Scott Glenn. He is the Hawaii State Energy Officer. Wow, what a combo! What a team! This is really an important show. And the title of our show is "What are we going to do with coal?" And that may be an understatement, but what are we going to do with coal? Theoretically, now the title of the show is light or coal at the end of the tunnel. That's very nuanced, Marco. Thank you for that. Okay, so Marco, will you make appropriate introductions?
Absolutely. I always suffer a bit of performance anxiety after following your lead, Jay, but I will do my very best. It's always super to have my friend Dr. Jay Griffin back with us. I was just thinking earlier today, Jay, I remember kind of spying you for the first time. I was in that big hall, the Blaisdell, 1915. That would be a long time ago. 2015, during the next era hearings, and I saw, on the main dais there was Randy Iwase, Lorena Kiba, and Mike Champley, and then on the side of the room was Jay, always impeccably dressed, toiling away hard, working hard for the PUC. And I thought to myself, I wonder if Jay had any inkling back then that he would rise to the big chair. So that could be a kind of rhetorical question, but I don't want to come across as too elderly, but as your elder, since I am older than you, I just want to say how pleased and proud I am of you and what you're doing there with the commission. And Scott, it's great to have Scott from Hawaii State Energy Office. It's the first time I'll get a chance to go direct with you, Scott, and so much juicy energy stuff going on in the state, day to day, week to week, month to month, and into the glorious future to 2045, right? Which I think we're going to hit those targets hopefully a lot sooner than that. So I think I'll lead off with kind of my first question here, which is, I was one of the people watching this rather extraordinary show from last Tuesday, March 16th, that the commission put on a working group meeting, stakeholders meeting. I'm not sure what the exact title was, but it was looking at docket 2021-0024, amongst other things, which we can get into some, but essentially looking at the challenges that we are facing collectively, the challenges that Hawaiian Electric is facing in bringing on new cost-effective renewable generation in a timely fashion. Also discussing community-based renewable energy, CBRE for short. And I watched the entire proceedings over 3 hours, and I was struck by a number of things. And just FYI, last time I looked this morning, that particular YouTube has been watched by close to 1,300 people, 1,300, which I find rather extraordinary. I didn't know so many people took such an active interest in PUC matters, but I think that's probably pretty remarkable. So with that intro, Jay, you were leading the meeting. You spent a good amount of time at the last half hour or so of the meeting discussing a number of concerns that you had. I would like to ask you, I guess, what should be those people who watch that meeting or read about it, what should be our principal takeaways from that meeting of last Tuesday?
Good, thanks, Marco. Just a couple of the facts. Yeah, we opened up a docket to comprehensively track renewable projects going on in the state, review interconnection processes, and a particular focus on what we're calling the transition plans for retirement of two plants. We want to keep in mind we have two islands where we're looking to retire plants in the near future. So the first one is here on Oahu, the AES coal plant, largest plant on the island. And that time is before us. September 2022, next year, a little over 18 months. That plant's going to come offline, and we're going to need new resources to replace it. We've been working on that for a long time. We've done multiple rounds of utility scale RFPs as well as other programs, and we've held that was the third status conference on this topic now. We've seen delays in a number of projects, And really, I encourage people to watch it. We're going to take further follow-up action, but I really want to summarize, at least from my perspective, what happened in two areas. One is it's a call to action. And I think we'll talk more about, or I'll talk more about that and how that dovetails with what Scott's going to talk about with the governor's task force, and a call to course correction. And so let me talk about both of those. The call to action is that this is a big lift for everyone, and I mean everyone. We're going to need new projects online as this one goes offline. We've, as I said, been through multiple rounds of bidding. We have a large number of developers, very sophisticated companies from around the world. They're going to need, help navigating the various different processes here in our state to get them online as soon as we can. That's a coordinated task, and Scott and his task and the task force convene at the request of the governor are going to help with that. But that's not the only thing we need. We need lots of different contingency actions to be in play, because no single one, we cannot rely on a single one. And so part of the call to action is other providers out there offering the commission and other stakeholders their thoughts, other actions we can be taking to make this transition safely. And so we'll be receiving comments on Thursday on some of those additional actions. We've asked the developers for their ideas on how we can be more disciplined about the timeline and possibly speed up the timelines for bringing those projects on. But we're going to need new actions, new programs, and the commission has taken some initiative on that. On Friday, we issued a letter, particularly targeted with the solar companies and what we call DER providers, looking at setting up a emergency demand response program that other states have done in these types of situations. That's what I call the call to action. We all need.
Hey, what actions are you calling for specifically?
Well, we need additional resources that can backstop taking the plant offline. And so these are what you call generation capacity, but also energy. And the coal plant is the lowest cost source of energy generally on the island, consistently. And the positive news was a lot of the new renewable projects were at or below the cost of that plant, and when they're paired with storage, they really were planned to ease our transition. They're going to help us provide the generating capacity needed to offset what was lost with the coal plant, but do it at a cost that, again, is at or below the cost of coal, and very cost effective relative to the cost of oil, which is what we're going to burn in the absence of any other generating resources. And that's what's been a real concern to the commission and us, is there hasn't been as aggressive push to bring these projects online. They've been delayed between 10, 12 months. On the island of Maui now, we have one that's over 2 years. And so when we don't get these projects online, we take off other resources. We're going to burn oil in the near term. And if we don't get enough over the long term, we're going to burn it over the long term. And to me, that's not the direction that we need to go.
Let me see if I understand. So coal, the last coal is going to be over in September of 2022. We are getting close to that. We're a year and a half away from that. And the idea is to replace the capacity that will be lost when coal goes offline with other projects. And I guess those other projects would be renewable projects. And your concern that you expressed is that if we get to September 2022 and we don't have those other projects to replace that capacity, we'll be looking at oil again, which would be a huge step backward. And so the action you're calling for is to develop renewables in sufficient capacity to replace coal when coal goes offline. Am I right?
So that's the main set. And what I want to say is these projects were planned to be online well before when the coal plant went offline. When we approved them back in 2019, they were all supposed to be online this year. And so this is what I call the second part of that meeting, is the call to course correction. They went into an interconnection review process and then came out the other end with a 10 to 12 month delay without really any communication to anyone about that and the implications. And the implications are very serious. There's only one of those projects projected to be online just before the coal plant goes offline, the smallest one of the first four. the West Oahu project, 12.5 megawatts. The others come, or right now proposed to come shortly after that by the end of the year. And then the phase 2 projects all come in 2023. And
so that's not in time. That's not early enough to actually replace the coal.
So we're looking at, how can we pull those forward some? But now because of those delays, we're going to have to look at other actions, as well as understand what the potential impact of cost is. Because again, and I brought this up last week, if you think about that timing, right, that's going to be right Christmas season for everyone next year. And so the transition off of coal, we've put back in the hands of the oil markets. And so if we see prices go up and people see their bills go up by hundreds of dollars, it's going to be a grim Christmas. And so that these all matter. Like, we got to keep the lights on, but we got to make sure, we can do this in a way that keeps energy affordable. And my concern is, it seems like there hasn't been the balanced look at all of this. And, we have lots of options that did balance these, and they were put on the back burner and they were delayed and that those delays have been systematic through a lot of different programs. So I totally understand how individual projects hit bumps. But what we've seen is pretty systematic, and that's why the commission, has continued to follow up on this, is open the docket to review it. We haven't seen a lot of concerted actions to change, and that's what brought us to what we got to last week, the call to course correction. We've all got to
that means to speed up the course, speed up the process. But how can the PUC do that?
Well, one is by getting everyone's attention on this. is the first part, and then we're going to have Scott talk a little bit about how we also work in a coordinated fashion across the other, at least parts of government and other stakeholders that need to be aligned with this. And then we have other follow-up actions that, we've, in the course of this interconnection doc, we've talked about putting the possibility of penalties on the table if we see further delays or, continued delays. So we don't want to go there, but again, what I said is called a course correction. Now, like, our window of time is very narrow, and so we got to have everyone, and that includes our organization. I take responsibility for that, but it's got to be, that urgency needs to be shared by everyone.
So at these status meetings, do you get to the point of issuing orders, or put it another way, is the status meeting a basis on which you would issue orders? I know that in this status meeting, which I found unusual, maybe it's not, but where you were asking for a commitment by the utility. You were asking the utility to commit to certain things. Is that tantamount to an order?
We're following up with subsequent orders, so there'll be actions in writing, as well as I think we're looking at scheduling further status conferences. A good example is on the April 2nd, we'll be receiving the plan for Maui, and we'll be scheduling a fairly immediate, where the notice of this will be going out shortly. We're going to meet on that fairly quickly. Again, the solar project there, a key part of that transition has been delayed 2 years, pushed out again right up until the timeline of the retirement of the oil-fired unit. So we can't have this continue to repeat. We're going to see what we can do together to steer this back into a path that, again, we got to keep the lights on, and we don't want to put our future back in the hands of the oil market.
Is it fair to say that this is a status conference necessitated by the fact that it doesn't look like we'll have replacement capacity by the time coal goes offline, and that it's going to be followed by other status? I think you said you wanted to have status conferences monthly, or even more frequently, to keep control, keep advised on this. Am I right?
So one of the aspects of the opening order, we'd asked for weekly or sorry, monthly updates, these would be written status updates on all the projects, because we want to keep tracking these consistently. The responses will, we'll do it quarterly, and it's not okay at this point. We're going to all stay on it. Now there may not be, change month to month, but and a key part of this is about the transparency of all of these projects and their state of progress, and people having access to that information. I know when I would talk with Scott and their office is trying to track and facilitate these projects, having that information out publicly accessible is key for everyone, that we want to get coordinated action on these things, and we're going to need it from the other government agencies too. So this will be what we set up as partly a repository docket. That's the idea. We're trying to collect all the information in one central place. Right now, that those schedules and projects are generally spread across the other dockets we've had in reviewing the power purchase agreement. So part of the idea here was to put it in one coordinated place, where again, we have broad insight into what's going on.
So what commitments did you seek, and what commitments did you get from the utility about the steps going forward?
What I saw and what was agreed to is, we're going to work together on changing the trajectory here, and we'll see what the response is.
Can we move to Scott for a minute? Scott, the governor signed a bill a year or two ago calling for the retirement of coal in the state of Hawaii, and you've been tasked with implementing that bill. Can you talk about it?
You're muted.
Sorry. Thank you, Marco. Thank you, Jay, for having me on, and great to hear everything that Jay Griffin is describing, because it certainly does set up the situation and what we're going to be working with. So a little bit of background: in 2018, Governor joined the Powering Past Coal Alliance. This is an international effort by a lot of national and subnational jurisdictions to end coal use and to make progress on our climate change goals. At that point, we were aware that the September 1st, 2022 deadline was coming up, and there was a lot of broad agreement that we should be looking at retiring the coal plant. And that was when the stage 1 projects were, I think, just getting going, and there was an inkling that a stage 2 would be happening as well. And so Governor announced, it's time. And so he joined onto this alliance. And then last year, the legislature passed out a bill to do a couple things related to this, to help basically draw a line in the sand, if you will. And so Governor signed that bill, Act 23 of 2020. And I believe it was Representative Nicole Lowen's bill that this started as. So what this bill does is basically say the PUC, and I'm going to grossly paraphrase it, so please correct me, Commissioner, is that the PUC is not allowed to extend a power purchase agreement, amend, or kind of do any monkeying with it to help keep a coal plant open past September 1st, 2022. And I think it also tells the Department of Health that it's not allowed to extend clean air permits for coal past the end of the calendar year. So basically, there's kind of a two-pronged saying, we're closing this coal plant down in 2022. So that's kind of the background behind this.
What's the coordination that's necessary? Maybe I'm being simplistic, but why don't you just lock the door?
Great question. To get to that, and let me say that turning the coal plant going offline is a distinct kind of sequence of actions from renewable energy projects being permitted, constructed, and turned on. And so I think what Jay and I are talking about here are not really about the coal plant itself. That's being handled by the owner. They understand what the law says. They understand what the contract is. And I think they're looking at their options for how they move forward with that facility, what they may or may not be doing with it. But our effort is more on the renewable energy side and what has to come along for them to be able to turn that key. So that's I think, our focus.
So Jay, if the coal plant closes down, and it must by virtue of this statute, on the existing arrangement for these projects, what would happen if it were permitted to go forward without a course correction?
Good question. And this is where I want to, again, in the theme of coordination, collaboration, we've tapped HNEI and Rick Rochlow and their team to help do independent analysis of the reliability of the system. And so, the problem, we're in a bit of a hole with the delays in the projects, but what they have been able to show through some very sophisticated, their modeling team is one of the best in the industry. I've watched their webinars, and they're followed by people throughout particularly the renewable energy side, the grid integration of renewables. So they're using very sophisticated analytical techniques to run thousands of different simulations of the system under all different weather conditions, whether power plants fail. Is another thing to keep in mind is that this is what we saw in Kauai. You have unplanned outages, multiple plants at the same time, and so what you plan for may not be what you see in reality. So these simulation methods look at lots of different cases, and give you some insight of what could happen in the future. So the positive news is, from what their analysis has showed, is that we can meet our existing kind of baseline level of reliability. We do need to put kind of the maintenance on a deferral schedule for next fall. Basically, there's two risky periods, or two key periods. One is the fall, and that's largely driven by the fact that we have our high, usually what you call the system peak on the island. So basically the Kona days where the trade winds shut off, gets really hot, everyone turns their AC on. That's almost always driving the highest demand of the year, and so that's usually sometime in the fall. And then another key period is the summer, just when demand goes up overall. So the fall of 2022, what they showed is that with I believe it was the one plant online, and shoot, I've got to pull it up here. I think it was about 50 megawatts of additional resources. We can get back to our baseline level of reliability, and that could be met through a variety of ways. We had the two other projects, solar plus storage projects, scheduled to come on a few months later. If we can find ways to move that schedule up, that helps. If we can bring other resources on, these are programs that help tap resources in people's homes and businesses. There are other projects that the commission, or before the commission, that we haven't approved that could help. We can get to that another time. And then and what we've asked for, what are the other ideas people have? Hawaiian Electric brought forward a couple of concepts: building or leasing storage, reactivating the Honolulu plant was on their list. But we're asking for, we're casting the net to see what other ideas people have. So it's a very concerning situation. We need kind of all hands on here to, again, what I said, course correct.
Yeah.
And
well,
then
if you can't course correct for some reason, then the coal plant must terminate, be retired by law. Then you mentioned that that we'd have to go back to oil, and oil would be more expensive than renewables. But isn't it possible that oil could be cheap too?
It could. If you look, I pulled the numbers. If you looked at the avoided cost in this year, it was cheaper for part of the year. But that was driven by a global depression and with negative oil prices. So for 2020, roughly about half the year was lower. You go back to 2019, I believe over the entire year period, oil prices were higher than the plant we're taking offline. And certainly you go back to other years prior to that. So, if you want to do the over under on this, I don't think we want to do that for everyone on the island.
Well,
oil prices are going up now.
If you have, yes, and if you have a reopening globally, let's assume that the COVID is diminished in the next year or so, and we have more economic activity, not only in the United States but elsewhere.
They're going to rise.
It's
That's the
gonna rise,
driver. Yeah.
They already are rising.
To Scott's point, actually, if you look at the avoided cost right now, it is already higher. So if we're to do this today, it'd be a higher cost.
One other factor, Jay, I'd like to ask you about is that, and I guess this has some direct or indirect effect or result from increased economic activity. You go back to the question of climate change. I mean, that has not stopped. Uh, and climate change creates extreme weather, and extreme weather creates reliability problems at the least. We could have extreme weather here this summer for a minute, in the storm season at least, and maybe outside the storm season. How does that affect this whole analysis about getting replacement capacity in on time?
I think it's exactly the point, and we've seen it, play out in California and Texas now. That even when you look, well, they had some inclination of those events, but they're more extreme than they have been in the past, and it's part of the reason for the different methodological tools that this team's been using to try and test, what does the system do under the extreme events. So that part of the analysis, but to your point, I think that the clear answer here is more resources, a bigger buffer by next September is in everyone's interest. That's why, again, the call to action, we got to get the urgency for everyone to bring these items online.
I think what I hear you saying is a buffer means even more than you think you might need, just in case you have trouble with any of the components of the system that are providing energy. So if one fails, you have a reserve, so to speak. One fails in the case of an extreme weather situation, you have a reserve that can replace that. Am I right?
Yeah, well, exactly. And two, that I think, and we've talked about this from the beginning, that we need a portfolio here because any one measure may fall off. And that's where we had a lot of discussion last week. I mean, and I want to be clear, One Electric has proposed a large energy storage project that on paper would, if you look at the capacity numbers, significantly improve reliability if it can be in on time. Our concern with that, and it's been there from the beginning, is that basically that's been the sole reliance has been on that egg. That's not prudent by that standpoint. And then the cost is a whole other discussion. That's the one that we've really struggled with.
Well, that's part of this whole analysis, isn't it? You don't want consumer prices to increase. You want them to be reduced. The cost of oil is way more than the consumer should have to afford, and so forth.
We're trying to juggle both of these in the transition. We understand, this was a low cost resource. I mean, that's what was so encouraging about the range of different projects. But if you look at the average cost of the utility scale projects, they're all at or below the cost of the plant we're taking offline. So that was the priority. That was the priority for us. We approved all of those projects except one within 3 months. That one took 6 months. It came in after. So, we moved our processes, we prioritized them. We wanted them to move through our part of the process quickly to leave time for all the other requirements, all the other permits and approvals that were required.
Yeah.
So
I get the idea, and I want to turn this over to Marco for his questions, but I get the idea that you're faced with delays. This is all a matter of dealing with delays. So what kind of delays have we meaning the whole community, experienced in moving the needle ahead here over the past year or two, and what kind of delays are you focused on relieving?
That's part of the perspective work we're looking at. But I mean, all of these have fundamentally been held up in what's called the interconnection process, and it's a key part. I mean, we need the review done. We need the technical analysis to know that these projects are not going to cause other problems. So we're not looking at shortcuts here. But and I'll speak about it personally. I mean, my observation is that we've seen these delays in a range of programs. It goes all the way back to the feed-in tariff program. We've seen it with community renewables. We've seen it with these projects. some degree, we saw versions of it with the waiver projects. And so, I get it. This is complicated. You don't want to make a mistake. But there's gotta, and this is what we asked in prior status conferences, in that conversation about getting all the information you need, getting everything you need to make a call, like these other factors of the delays of the project, bringing reliability concerns and cost concerns, like you got to balance that, and just kind of not factoring that into your overall decision making is put us in this position. So that's what we're going to work on it collectively. But that's a key part of the process, but not the only one. I mean, to the point here, and the developers concerned, they have faced a whole series of additional approvals. Those agencies need to do their full, whatever the law requires of them, and they got to balance it with their other work that they have to do. So again, it takes all the different stakeholders here working together. And so, the urgency of the matter is what I applaud. I said it last week. I applaud Scott's willingness to take the leadership and probably take some of the arrows as this goes along. But work with the different parts of the state, local, federal governments, work with the private sector on these projects. So try and turn it over to him now.
Yeah. Well, let me turn it over to Marco, and he can follow up.
Thanks, Jay. Yeah, I mean, I recall Hawaiian Electric Senior VP Colton Ching, who spent a fair amount of time talking on Tuesday. He referred to this tide reserve margin, which is concerning to you, concerning to anybody and everybody on Oahu. And the question is, how tight's it going to be? And that's the big unknown, right? We want it to be less tight, certainly, because the more tight it is, the more scary it is in terms of possible blackouts, coal and stockings, and so forth. So moving to you, Scott. So what is it that you, the Hawaii State Energy Office, and any task force put together can do in a tangible, concrete way to assist the process, to assist more megawatts of cost-effective renewable energy coming online in a more timely fashion? What cards do you and your team and the state and the governor have to play?
Thanks, Marco. Let me read you just a quick line from our statute. So the Hawaii State Energy Office is to provide renewable energy project deployment facilitation to assist private sector project completion when aligned with state energy goals. So that's one of our missions, just right there. And that's what we're talking about right now, is how do we help facilitate getting some of these private projects done to meet the state's energy goals, which Jay just outlined, and not least the climate change one, but also some of these other ones, reliability, cost, affordability, et cetera. So some of the things that we see up front that we can be working on is building basically what we call in the emergency response world, a common operating picture. Basically, what's the big picture view of everything? How do all these projects fit in together? How do they line up? Who's in what order going to what agency? And can we start aligning these things and really working with agencies to figure out who's up to bat next? So, hey, Department of Land and Natural Resources, you have a review, say, with the State Historic Preservation Division of this project, but you're not the last stop on this train, right? And next it's going to go to the Department of Planning and Permitting at the city, and they're going to have a bunch of permits they need to do. And they can't issue their permits until the state agency is done with theirs. And so that's the kind of thing I think we can offer to tighten up schedules, get people alerted that things are coming, try to reduce the onesie-twosies and the ticky-tacky conversations and try to consolidate things, knock them out together in one or two conversations, move things down from waiting weeks for an answer to days or a week. Often we hear about applications to agencies where a developer, someone might submit their application. Agencies are busy. They've got a lot of mandates that they have to fulfill, a lot of responsibilities. Renewable energy might not be one of their priorities. And so they see this application come in and it just sits in the queue. It's at the bottom of the stack, right? And they don't get to it for a couple of weeks, look at the application and say, oh, you filled your application out wrong. You need to start over. That's the kind of stuff I think we, through a coordinated effort and with the governor's attention and Mayor Blangiardi's attention, then those are the kinds of things we can, I think, tighten up. And to me, that's the real value that comes from this. We want to respect each agency's own decision-making process. We're not trying to shortcut an agency doing its due diligence for its own work, for its own public trust responsibility. That's their kuleana, and we want to respect that. What we want to do is make sure that they're doing a timely effort and they know what else is going on around it so that they can get ready. Hey, such and such agency is wrapping up their review. It's coming to you next. It's going to be submitted. And I don't want to say it's just agencies too. On the developer side, sometimes they don't know how to complete an application correctly, or they don't know what an agency is looking for in their answers that they provide. What are the key points they need to be making? And so that's helping them understand up front, hey, when you go to this agency, make sure you're completing these portions correctly or providing this information. That helps the agency not have to have the back and forth of, oh, we need you to redo this and redo this and redo this, which does happen. So to me, that's the real value in the concrete nuts and bolts schedule tightening that we can do. And to Jay's point, it's been a lot of delay and schedule slipping. Things keep moving to the right. I think the first task is to stop it from moving to the right. Let's stay committed to where we are, and then let's see what we can move to the left. Where can we get those schedule savings and bring things up online faster? One of the points that came up during the status conference was the guaranteed commercial operation date is actually different from when they think the project will actually be ready to go. That's pretty much their worst case scenario in the developer's timeline. And if they slip past that date, they start encouraging damages and fees that they have to pay that they don't want to do. And so they've built into their schedule a certain amount of time, weeks or months, of uncertainty to where they can think, this is where we think we can get it. This is our guaranteed backstop when we're going to be online or we know we're going to pay a penalty. And what they've said is a lot of that uncertainty in that window is due to government approvals. And so if we can help tighten that up, then we can make what they have in their books as something that maybe they're not willing to publicly say, well, we think we can hit this date, a much more likely target. There's one other point too that I wanted to bring up. Jay Fidell, you had mentioned, what are some of the things that are affecting these timelines? And it came up also during the status conference, is that sometimes developers are rejiggering these projects in response to community feedback. And that's something we actually want. We want communities to feel like they have a say in a project. We want that community input to be incorporated in a timely basis. And we don't want folks to feel like things are being railroaded through or that community input is the cause for delay. That I think is a counterproductive both to the immediate effort and to the longer term goals that we have for the state. And so being able to help facilitate some of that community dialogue in these approval processes and some of the development and HECO conversations, I think that's another way that the task force, the energy office, can help out.
I can see why Jay Griffin would want to have your help on this. But sorry, Mark, I just want to interrupt with one short question. But query, is this something that the Energy Office has done before, or are we in a kind of new model now, where the Energy Office is acting under this mandate and is likely to act again as we go forward toward 2045 to expedite and coordinate and bringing the parties together? Is this something you've done before, or is it something new?
That's a good question. The Energy Office, so the part of the statute I read is our new statute from Act 122 of 2019. So we didn't necessarily have that explicit authority before, or if we did, and I wasn't with the Energy Office at the time, right? It still had to run through the Department of Business, Economic Development, and Tourism before any major policy decisions could be made. And now the Energy Office is an attached agency, right? So we're policy independent. I work directly with Governor. Governor named me a member of his cabinet. And so while I'm still administratively attached to DBED and work very closely with the DBED director, we also can take initiatives now that we think are important. And so I think this is one. And Jay, you might be right, because I think one of the, if we're successful with the task force and holding the line and making this transition, then I think we might be building a template for taking future fossil fuel plants offline. You know, Jay Griffin mentioned the Kahului plant that's up next. At some point, we got to tackle Waiau. At some point, we got to tackle the Big Island fossil fuel plants. These are, and they're all scheduled in the power supply improvement plan to go offline at certain points. And the updated integrated grid planning will probably have new timelines. But at some point, if we're going to hit our 2045 goals, these plants all have to be turned off in the next 20 years. And so this could be an outcome of a successful effort here.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. Sorry, Marco, go ahead.
That's okay. So I teach politics from time to time, guys, and I have a couple of political questions for you, Scott. One is just how high a priority topic item is this for Governor David Ige amongst his many, many, many competing priorities, right? And second, what practical pressure can you all put on various parties to move things along? To what extent can you gently, if necessary, crack some heads? So two-part question again. Where is this in kind of David Ige's panoply of priorities, and what practical pressure do you feel that your team can put?
On the first one, that's really a question for Governor himself on his priorities. I guess I would say that nothing beats COVID at this point, and you know, Hawaii's overall well-being. This is a part of that, and you know, to the extent that we have state agencies and the city involved, the fact that Governor is willing to convene this task force and really on short notice to stand this up and put the resources into it, I think is a testament to the level of priority for it. You know, not least a consideration is that the scheduled, you know, turning the key for the coal plant is going to happen before this governor finishes his second term. So, you know, that's a factor as well, possibly. But again, I don't want to speak for Governor himself on his priorities. On the second side, you know, I think the second part of the question, you know, one of the phrases that I really resonated with, and it came from HECO actually in one of their filings for the status conference, was this idea of a shared responsibility. That, you know, it isn't all just HECO's responsibility to get to the finish line. They have a large role to play in it, but they're not the only one. And there are things outside of their control in getting to the finish line, including some of the approvals that some of these independent power producers will need from state agencies. And so one of the things that I've been thinking about, and we've been looking at and trying to figure out what is the scope of this task force, how does it actually go about doing its work, is, you know, you mentioned the word pressure. I don't know that it's pressure so much as it's focusing on our collaborative advantages of working together. You know, we have a shared responsibility, but is it really Colton Ching's the best use of his time to go meet with the city planning department about permits independent power producers need? I would submit that it's probably not, that I would really prefer for the vice president, senior vice president of HECO to be focused on the interconnection standards and some of the things that only HECO can do, and let an entity like the Energy Office help facilitate those dialogues that need to happen among the multiple IPPs and the city, for example. Or, you know, they can talk to each other too. And if they need help, then we can come in and help. So, you know, I'll leave the pressure to the more regulatory structures. And I think we're focusing more on that collaborative advantage of tackling our shared responsibilities.
Thank you.
Well, Jay, we're almost out of time, but it strikes me that this is historic in its own way. It's historic as far as the PUC is concerned. To motivate greater alacrity here. It is historic in bringing the state energy office in, and we have a change. It's a pivot of sorts. You agree?
Look, I mean, it's right. I use a term called action. I mean, and what we're trying to do here is, I don't know if I would say totally unprecedented in the industry, but we're one of the early birds on this, particularly retiring coal plants, replacing them with a portfolio of new resources. Typically it would be one for one. You retire a baseload plant. I mean, in the industry, you would retire something like this. Traditionally, you would build a combined cycle plant. That's what has been going on for 10 years. These old coal plants going offline, being replaced by natural gas. So this is something that has emerged. People have talked about it for a while. Not totally unprecedented. I tapped brain trusts elsewhere in California. They had to urgently replace when their nuclear plant went down, when their Aliso Canyon gas storage facility went down. They had to go out and do immediate urgent procurements, and they took the whole range of resources and got the job done. And so I talked to the president of the CPUC at that time, what was going to be needed when we saw this plant going offline. And so that was a lot of the thinking between, the portfolio projects but having to have everything move and be online. So, it's a big lift here. It can be done. But, we do need, we need everyone focused on the outcome here, is getting as much of the preferred cost-effective resource online ahead of the retirement on all these islands. That's what will smooth the transition. And so that's why we have had to go and do things that, are not normal course of business necessarily. So.
Yeah. Good for you, Jay. Marco, you want to close?
Sure. Well, and I can't, the cautionary tale, which is whacked the folks of Texas right between the eyes and then some, right? And that's an understatement and then some in terms of what happens, black swan events, right? So-called black swan events that took down much of Texas, at the worst possible time. So, here were these isolated island grids, and, it's never too soon to put too much effort and thought and energy into trying to get it right without multiple iterations of problems, right? Or lack of margin, rolling blackouts, cold at Christmas, and so forth. So, once again, guys, I think we just kind of barely scratched the surface here, and there's so much more I wanted to talk about and ask Scott about and ask Jay about. And that's just a very powerful reason, in my view, to hopefully get you guys back on soon. And I do mean soon, because I think this is very timely. This is very important. And, we talk about some interesting and juicy stuff that is worth putting out there and disseminating. So thank you so much, Jay Griffin.
One plug, one positive note. Okay, disconnection moratorium. It's gone on throughout the industry. We extended for 2 more months. I want to give credit actually to all of our utilities. Hawaiian Electric has been very proactive in how they've managed this and communicated to customers. We're going to need people to get on to payment plans, but also related to this, in the two new rounds of COVID relief, our congressional delegation got assistance for Hawaii. It's coming down through the counties. The counties are standing up those programs now, working with utilities. So let's get everyone the help that they need and, pull out of this urgent situation. So.
That's great, Jay. That's
Excellent.
Really important for the welfare and well-being of the state in general, and of course for the economy. Thank you, Jay Griffin. Thank you, Scott Glenn. Thank you, Marco Mangelsdorf. It's been a great discussion. We hope we can do it again soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you all.
Super.